to this next video in my series of Gimme Shelter Security in Azure. Today we're going to talk about Azure Active Directory. So last week we talked about defense in depth and building your security posture in your Azure environment. And one of those critical pieces is identity. And Azure Active Directory is the key piece of identity within the Azure environment and Microsoft 365 ecosystem. And we're going to hit on that. We're going to expand upon that the next few weeks around the whole identity and access management environment and services. But today we're going to just give a high level overview of Azure Active Directory and what it is. My name is Dwayne Natwick. I am a Microsoft Azure MVP and a cloud training architect at Skill Me Up and Opsagility. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer and a regional lead for that program. And you can find me on the social media links provided on this slide. So today we're going to talk about some of the concepts around Azure Active Directory and what those concepts are, what the difference is between Active Directory domain services and Azure Active Directory at a high level, what the different additions are and what you can find in terms of options with Azure Active Directory, and then talk a little bit about AD join and self-service password reset. This is not going to be the full depth of what Azure Active Directory is and all of identity and access management services. I've actually got built in about 4 different videos to kind of get you comfortable with everything that goes around Azure Active Directory and identity management. As many of you know and have heard, people will say identity is the new security perimeter, and it's very important that we look at very deeply the security around and our identity and access management and everything that goes into that. So we're putting a lot of time into the videos that are going to cover that. So what is Azure Active Directory is a good first step. And what Azure Active Directory is the cloud-based suite of identity management within the Azure ecosystem. It is utilized for Microsoft 365 and all of the 365 services. It's also utilized for the Azure environment as well. And then what it does is then provides all of the authentication and device management, hybrid identities, all of that goes into verifying your identity and accessing resources within the Azure and Microsoft 365 ecosystem runs through Azure Active Directory. And here are some of the concepts that we talk about when we talk about Azure Active Directory. We have our identity, which is the object that can be authenticated, and that can be, a user, a group, a resource. Many different things fall into that object piece within Azure Active Directory. Then we have our account, which is then, what that identity is. And the data that's associated with it. So that is that object, that user, and what their identity is, who they are, what their email address is, and what where they're located and things like that. And then our AD account then is what's created based on the Azure Active Directory or another Microsoft Cloud service like Microsoft 365. We have our tenant, which is the domain and trusted instance that is being utilized within the infrastructure. And then we have our directory, which is then that trusted tenant and as well as the Azure Active Directory. So that's your, ultimately your domain, your .onmicrosoft.com with your company name in front of it is that directory. And then you have your subscription, which is what's used to pay for those services. So you have that as your highest level. If you've been around networking for a while, you understand Active Directory and Active Directory domain services, having a domain controller on your on-premises system. Those, and when you talk about that versus Azure Active Directory, there's a big difference. there's no forests or group policies and things like that in Azure Active Directory. It is a thin single service identity management service within the cloud. It is not as deep and sophisticated as Active Directory domain services from a standpoint of how it imparts policies on your environment. It does not do that. All it does is it manages and maintains your identity and utilizes then REST APIs and doesn't use LDAP. It utilizes the internet-based services to make those calls to identity rather than an all-encompassing server infrastructure that is utilized to manage your environment. It does very different things from that standpoint. It does have a lot of federated services and can use third-party services such as Facebook or LinkedIn, Google to also allow people to authenticate through that for guest access and for access to your websites and things like that as well. So it's important to understand that there's a big difference between the two, that they aren't the same. When you talk about Active Directory domain services on premises and Azure Active Directory, they're two different things. There are ways to synchronize and connect those, which we'll talk about again when we talk about hybrid identities in another video. And what additions do we have in Azure Active Directory? When you subscribe to a Microsoft 365 account or an Azure account, you get the free service, which allows you to do some B2B collaboration. It gives you a Microsoft account that can be utilized both in your organization or as a guest account on another organization, as well as allows you to authenticate to your services. It doesn't provide a whole lot of rich services, but you do get some additional, you do get that identity within the environment. And then Office 365 also has Office 365 identity and access. So both of those pretty much come with your services when you create a subscription within either Office 365 or Azure. You get Azure Active Directory right off the bat at no additional charge. Once you get into the premium services of both P1 and P2, that's where you really get the strong security services, and you get the hybrid identities, you get advanced group access, you can create dynamic groups, you get then also conditional access, information protection, and information governance at the highest level of a P2 subscription. So when you're working within an enterprise, it's very important that you invest in those premium subscriptions, depending on what you need within your environment. If you want, the highest level of information protection, information governance, the P2 subscription's the way to go. And there's some services that we'll talk about in a couple videos from now as we talk about the advanced services that require this P2 license, and really is, if you're an enterprise with a lot of users, definitely a recommended path to take in terms of subscribing to that level of Azure Active Directory. And then we can also talk about Azure Active Directory Join, where this provides then those seamless connections, those seamless identities with single sign-on, enterprise compliant roaming for users across devices. So, the Windows Hello support, if you're utilizing your face recognition on your Windows devices, access to Microsoft Store, on-premises resources, having seamless access, and the ability to do hybrid join within your environment are all what goes into the Azure AD joins. And again, we'll talk more about the single sign-on and on-premises hybrid identity services in a couple videos, but just to introduce you to some of the services that Azure Active Directory allows you to tie into your whole Windows and Microsoft identity ecosystem your Azure Active Directory provides you with that path to doing that. And then finally, allowing self-service password resets, being able to allow users to do their own password resets through identifying themselves through security questions and or a email or a phone call with a passcode, or a temporary code, allows and takes a lot of the management overhead off of your IT department that's not fielding calls for resets, but it allows you to require multi-factor authentication for your self-service password reset. Users can also register and self-register for self-service password reset, very similar to how they would register for multi-factor authentication, where they would turn on self-service password reset. It's going to then require them to identify themselves, going back to that zero trust model, continually identifying who you are and notifying and understanding who you are and recognizing who you are. That is how that self-service password reset takes place. And then they put in there, you can set how many questions are required and how many questions they use to register, and then how many questions they're asked then to verify who they are before that password is reset as well. And then there's an additional, when that password is reset, they get an additional email saying, hey, your password was reset. Did you do that? So that's, again, that zero trust model of continually verifying who you are. And self-service password reset is very helpful from an organizational standpoint because it takes a lot of the burden off of the IT department fielding calls and incidents for people that are locked out and need to reset their password. They can do that themselves. And that's the last piece that we're going to cover this week in our Gimme Shelter series. Again, like I said, we're going to spend a good amount of time. I think I have 3 or 4 videos earmarked for identity and access management, which all fall into the Azure Active Directory topic area. So tune in next week. We're going to talk more about those identity and access management pieces, and feel free to reach out to me on social media at the links provided on the slide. Thank you very much and have a great day.